have not been to Bingara, it seriously is part of our spiritual and Kitherian connection to make that journey, to fully understand what our parents and grandparents went through. So we really are indebted to Peter for the dedication that he's shown. Thank you again.
I'd like to introduce Grace Marcellus, whose presentation is titled The Ruminations of a Daughter of a Kitherian Milk Bar Owner, Am I Greek or Australian? Grace's father came from Francia and her mother from Kefalogiannika. Her father first came out to Australia in the 1920s, returned to Kitchener to get married, and both came to live in Babinda, Queensland, where her father works in the White Rose Milk Bar. Grace is now retired after having worked as a preschool teacher for many years, then carried out further studies, ending up with a PhD based on early childhood education, child development. She has since worked as a lecturer in this area of teacher education. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks very much. Well, my paper is based on my experiences. I'm not generalising, and I don't want to offend anybody. It did come to my mind once, who am I? Am I Greek? Or am I Australian? My yaya came out and she said without any doubt at all, oh, you're an Ellie neither. My school friends said you were born in Australia, so you're an Australian. And I was talking to one of my neighbours, and as soon as I mentioned this paper, she went, now my father was Scottish, she was going back in her history trying to work out who she was. I also mentioned to another young man, and he said, I'm Welsh, and he was very dependent. So it depends on one's criteria, I guess. It didn't really matter, but I'm just raising this issue. I think one needs to know where one is in life, whether you're an Italian or a Greek or a Caledonian. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have a feeling of a sense of a belonging and you can find your identity. And the thing is to find a balance rather than one or the other. But then that depends on the individual. So it really wasn't a very big issue in my life. But I thought I'd just bring this up because everyone's brought beautiful photographs and I haven't got one single photograph. So I'll be as quick as I can. But I learned being bilingual, and I'm not very good with Greek. But when I was 10, we were sitting in one of those toast rack trams. Does anyone remember those? Yes, somebody does.
B-class or A-class?
And Mum and I were sitting opposite this very big man. His waistcoat, I think it was, barely buttoned up. So I said to Mum in Greek, I wonder if those buttons will burst by the time he gets out. Well, you know what's going to happen, don't you? He got up eventually with his sock and he looked at me and see, my dear, they didn't pop up. So you've got to be very careful what you say. When it was time for me to go to school, when I left school to do further study, Mum and Dad were very happy to do that. There was no opposition whatsoever. I became a preschool teacher and I loved my work. And it was through one of her Greek friend's daughters that I found this profession, and it was really wonderful. And then they were quite happy for me to do further study. They didn't stop me at all. But I have to remember, with my Greekness, my beloved parents did the very best they could to raise me in a new country. Even though they lacked education, they lacked the opportunities, which was the right that we have now here in Australia, and they missed out on the circumstances that was their right. But because of that time in our history, I suppose, but did they manage? Yes. They started a shop. They made some money. a Greek helped Dad, and Dad in turn, once he was established, helped other Greeks. I was told that our house was mortgaged 3 times so he could help other Greeks. So that was the Greekness that came through. It wasn't just an Australian thing, well, probably they could have done that, but that Greekness that you all understand was part of Mum and Dad. They had these values and they loved their family. I was an only child, by the way, at that time. And he heard before, he came out at 1920. Why? To raise money for his sister's pre-K. How many boys would do that today? I hope there might be 1 or 2. It depends on the situation. And then Yaya in Greece sent him a message somehow to say, I've got a lovely young woman here for you to marry. Come over and marry her. He did. And he brought it to Australia, to Babinda of all places. Hot, hot weather. And it was so hot they eventually moved to the Blue Mountains, which was slightly different. So this is it. They settled into a very new life, no training. All this Greekness was coming through, and they worked hard as a team. Both Mum and Dad followed the path of many other Kiperians who migrated to Australia in those early years. By sheer hard work and many sacrifices. How many holidays did Dad have? I think it took him 40 years to go back to Greece. And then Mum came back and she said, they called us Australesi. She was really offended. But that's how it was. She was speaking Greek with an Australian accent. And she never thought that would happen. But she said Australia was her home after that. But that's how they did it. They didn't have any formal training, but they managed to raise some money and buy another shovel at a time and fend for me and my bench guy had a little brother, and then they left us something in their will. But they didn't have anything in Greece. Now that's Greekness, isn't it? Oh, there's probably other nationalities that do the same thing. But now, having had my experiences, I now realise that being a first-generation female born in Australia with Kitherian parents can be quite a privilege. I've got something that I noticed a lot of Australian girls or women of my age don't have. There's a sense of pride, and it's a privilege. We now virtually straddle 2 cultures. We belong to our parents and their heritage, and we belong to Australia and their heritage. It's a new phenomenon, really, when you come to think of it, because it can't be helped. We were brought up in Australia with Greek parents, 2 different cultures. And we are unique through no effort on our part. It just happened. So, how great is that? So, who am I? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, can identify with what you presented. It was really enjoyable, and I think walked us back down memory lane. Thank you.